Hello and welcome to Geeky Guys. If you're into geeky things, we're the guys for you. Just a quick note before we get into the video for today. If you go onto the Patreon site in the next couple of days, next couple of weeks, there's a couple of exclusive videos that I'm putting up there for patrons. So if you would like to become a patron, now's the best time to do so. You're going to get more exclusive videos per week and per month and whatnot. So go and check that out. As always, all links are in the description. Welcome to this video today, guys, whether you're here for the first time or you're returning. In this video, we're having another look into the set of Strixhaven, and today we're digging into our final set review here. This is the set review for green, colourless, multicolour, and lands for today. So there's not a huge amount in green, a few cards, there's not that many colours. There's not that many lands, but there is a lot of multicolour stuff, so we better get right on into it as quickly as we can, because otherwise we'll be here for quite a while. First off, Ecological Appreciation, X and 2 and a green. Sorcery, search your library for and graveyard for up to 4 creature cards with different names that have a mana value of X or less. Reveal them. An opponent chooses 2 of those cards, shuffle the cards into your library, and put the rest into the battlefield. Exile this card. So it tutors 2 cards essentially for the most part to your battlefield. That's the main thing that you've got to look at when you're looking at this card. But for the most part, you get your opponent's choice of like the worst 2 of those cards. So this is quite good in Commander, of course, because we've got, multiple different creatures, so it doesn't matter to us to be like, well, what would I get with multiple different creatures? They do have to be of, that mana value, so if you only can pump 1 mana into it, of course it's not as good, I don't think. I mean, you can get a bunch of 1-drops, but what are you going to do with a bunch of 1-drops? I don't know. But then again, there are things that you can do with a bunch of 1-drops, but still, I don't know. I think you want a lot more out of this. Maybe this wants to go in a Zexara deck where you have a lot of mana, things like that. You really want to have a big mana deck. Or you want to have a infinite mana payoff or something like that. You want a specific 2 or 3 creature combo that's fairly redundant, that you can just go, okay, well, it doesn't matter because I have, all the other halves or whatever it is of the cards that I tutor up with, so it doesn't matter, or it doesn't matter what you give me and what you don't give me. Basically, any of these cards will combo together and I'll just win no matter what. So, there's just levels of diversity in that whole, like, oh, well, I just win. That's where I think this sort of falls. It's an alright value card for the most part, but again, I just think when you're getting to this sort of stuff where you want to be casting it for like 5 or 6 mana or whatever, 4, 5 or 6 mana, even 3, I don't know, you probably want to cast it for more than 3 or more at least. So when you're talking about that level, I think it's got to do a lot, especially when you're putting them into the battlefield. So I'm sure there's some combos that you can do with it, but again, it is sorcery, so it is a little bit limited. It is sort of like Tooth and Nail in a little while, but again, your opponent does get to choose the cards that you get into the battlefield. But again, just 2 creatures, tutored straight to your battlefield is pretty dang good. So, that can certainly see some play somewhere. Next, Verdant Mastery, 5 and a green. This is another one of the cycles where you can pay an alternate cost. You may pay 3 and a green rather than pay this spell's mana cost. So you search your library for up to 4 basic land cards. Reveal them. Put one of them onto the battlefield tapped under an opponent's control if the 3 and a green was paid. Otherwise, put 2 of them into the battlefield tapped under your control and the rest go to your hand. Then you shuffle. So, 2 lands to the battlefield, and this is basic lands. So, that effect, plus you're getting maybe 1 land to your hand, or 1 land under an opponent's control, or just 2 lands to your hand. For 3, I don't know whether you want to give away a land, unless you can get it back somehow, but I don't know, it just seems pretty bad otherwise. I don't know, but there might be a deck or 2 that want to do this. Some group hug decks wouldn't care that much or whatever, but certainly it still might be worth it to a degree if you can sort of cheat it out and things like that. If you just have it in a cascade deck or whatnot, things like this, that might be good. I still think it might be relevant, and it might come up every now and again where you just go, well, I don't really care, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to gain control of all my lands somehow, or I'm going to destroy all opponent's lands or something, or whatever. You're playing some sort of weird Tergrid style card. You're making them sacrifice their permanents, so therefore you're getting control of them, or you're just doing some sort of weird, not Zedru sort of Zedru deck, but a weird Zedru-like deck where you're stealing things or giving things away or whatnot and things like that. So maybe might be interesting there somewhere. I want to talk about some of the commons and uncommons here and there. There's not too many that are too interesting. Emergent Sequence, it's a 2-mana ramp spell though, so that's pretty good. But it does come with this slight downside where you search for that land and then it enters the battlefield as a creature, and it gets +1/+1 for each land you had entered the battlefield under your control this turn. So if you're playing this turn 2, it's probably only going to get maybe 1 or 2 counters. Depends. This is where you want that sort of spell to be on turn 2 so you can ramp early and quickly. Yeah, sure. I don't know how much of a downside this is, because it's hard to tell. But it is essentially making your land a creature. Therefore, your creature is weak to creature removal and board wipes and whatnot. So, you can get essentially wastelanded sort of effect, or, Armageddon to a degree, a little bit. Well, not Armageddon, I guess, because you're not losing all your lands, but you can lose a land from this because it becomes a creature. So you just have to be aware of that, I think. I don't think that this is too much of a downside, though. I think it is a little bit of a downside, and you do need to think about it. But I do think that this will see play in a lot of decks because it's just 2 mana ramp, and most of the time, I don't know how big that downside is going to play out. And again, there is things that you can do, and I think you just need to get out to that start, and if you lose things, eventually it doesn't really matter. You just need to be able to start playing the game, I think. So just sort of work around it a little bit, and I think it'll be alright. I want to talk about Croc Ranger for a second, because there's a lot of these Magecraft cards, and I think this one's alright. Whenever you cast or copy an instant sorcery, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So all of these Magecraft cards, I think a lot of them can see play. This one, I'm not 100% sure, but certainly maybe in some Teamer Spellslinger decks, maybe it can see some play there somewhere. There aren't that many decks that splice into green for Spellslinging in Commanders, but maybe it can see some play in some places if you really care about the +1/+1 counters here and there. Next, we're getting into the colourless stuff. Wandering Archaic / Explore the Vast Lands. Now, I'm going to say explore the Vastlands. I don't think that this will see much play. I think if you're a group hug deck, you might want to play it, but basically each player looks at the top 5 cards of their library, reveals a land card from or instant or sorcery from among those cards, puts the cards revealed this way into their hand, and the rest on the bottom of their library in a random order. Each player gains 3 life. So, you know, it sort of draws people 2 for the most part, and gains them 3 life. It's okay to draw a couple cards for 3, and gain 3 life isn't too bad for yourself, you know, and this is a colourless spell, so it can go anywhere, but I don't know, in a group hug deck, yeah, sure, you might want this, but I just don't see it seeing much play. But Wandering Archaic, a 5 mana creature, 4/4. Whenever an opponent casts an instant or sorcery spell, you may pay 2. If they may pay 2. If they don't, you may copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. This is pretty good for certain decks. Now, it's not the greatest thing in the world ever, because it is 5 mana, but again, it can offer you some value. It is a slight taxing effect, and some people don't really love that, but again, it's just fine. I think if somebody plays a Cultivate, and you go, oh, do you want to pay 2 for that, or I get a copy of it, you know, that's just fine. Somebody plays a card draw spell, like a Blue Sun's in it. You go, do you want to pay an extra 2 for that, or I get a copy of it? So, you know, those little things where you just go, oh, you know, I get a copy of it. You know, you're not denying them anything. You're just getting an additional benefit off of it. So it is one of those things where people don't want to, they want to pay the 2, but they also don't want to pay the 2 because they want to use as much of their mana as they can. This can just serve as like a removal thing where you're just like, okay, you kill my thing, which is this thing, of course, and then I get to kill one of your things if you don't pay 2, sort of thing. So you're hurting their mana, sort of thing, when they try to kill this. And if they don't try to kill it, then it just sticks around, and then you get more value out of it, hopefully. So I can certainly see it seeing some play. I'm not sure where it goes, but I certainly think it would go well in Colorless and Boros stroke white and red decks. Zelfair Boots are a 1 mana equipment. Quick creature has flying. Whenever a quick creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card, then discard a card and equip for 2. Flying is a pretty good evasive ability, and this is a pretty good equipment. I think that this can see a lot of play in Commander, especially in the, you know, equipment style shell decks. I still think you can see some play in other decks just to give, you know, certain Voltron commanders flying. It really helps that out. So if your commander really cares about being a Voltron commander, you might want this. But I still think that some creatures, you think to yourself, well, if my creature had flying, it would be so much better. Yes, it doesn't have haste, it doesn't have shroud, it doesn't have hexproof, it doesn't have indestructible, all that sort of stuff, those sort of main key things that a lot of players want, it doesn't have. But again, just being able to block a flyer sometimes is really good. And if you don't need to block the flyer, then sometimes just gaining flying and being able to punch through people's blockers when they don't have flying or reach and whatnot is really good. So I think it's certainly worth thinking about if you really care about, you know, having some flying creatures or needing some flying blockers or whatnot, things like that. Next, one of the lands that we're going to talk about, the Biblioplex. Colorless land, taps for a colorless. So 2 mana, you look at the top card of your library. If it's an instant sorcery, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. If you don't put it into your hand, you may put it into your graveyard. Activate this ability only if you have exactly 0 or 7 cards in hand. It's very similar to an old card. Now, I'm not going to complain about this sort of reprinting of old cards. I just wish, you know, sort of in a way at least, it isn't exactly the old card which everyone keeps talking about. and I understand that, but it is very similar, and that was the argument that I was sort of having with a few people a few weeks ago, and I sort of felt initially that it is sort of that reprint. It feels very much like Library of Alexandria or whatever it is. So it does feel a lot like that. It also just looks like it, so it's just one of those things. And a biblioplex is a library, so that it sort of has that flavour about it. But it is restricted to instant and sorceries. And it does sort of fuel graveyard strategies a little bit with putting them to your graveyard. And you can only activate it if you have 0 or 7 cards. So I think this is better in certain decks, like the instant and sorcery mainly matters, or you can recur whatever else from your graveyard, like lands, things like that, or creatures or whatnot. But otherwise, I don't think that this is that good, actually. I think, Library is obviously really good because it doesn't matter, you just draw the cards for the most part as long as you have the 7. But that's really hard to do. But in this case, you can at least do it when you have 0, which does help out some decks that get empty-handed really quickly, especially Spellslinger decks. They tend to empty their hand really quickly. And, if you just, tap this to essentially cantrip the top card of your deck, and if your top card of your deck is more another instant or sorcery card draw spell, then you might find some more gas. So, look, I'm not saying this goes in every one of those decks, but I think that a lot of those decks would tend to run this because, it just provides good value when you need it. And even if you don't need it, sometimes you might just, draw a card to sort of empty your hand of bad cards or see what's on the top more or less. It's sort of like a brainstorm or a surveil to a degree. So that, you might find this somewhat useful in even those decks where you do want to put things into your graveyard. I'm not sure. It seems like it can someplace though. But again, I just think this whole, the reserve list should be, held to and whatnot. Again, they've broken it so many times and this is not exactly a break, but it's certainly a bend, and that's where I'm, just discussing this, is I don't really care, and I don't think most people care. Most people just want to play the game, the number of people that are in the game now and the number of people that are going to continue to get in the game is only going to increase. And I sort of discussed this in a video that I did before, but, just the way Magic is going, I think that in the early days, maybe the whole reserve list did help out a little bit, and it certainly was useful, but I think its usefulness has sort of gone away, and outside of, really a handful of cards, not literally a handful, but a very select few cards, not more than a couple of hundred at the most, are not even that good cards and have been improved upon tenfold. So the majority of the reserve list is not even worth discussing. There's still going to be cards on the reserve list that are going to hold their value. Shivan Dragon, I said this before, the reserve list alpha limited edition, whatever, Shivan Dragon is thousands and thousands of dollars. The core set, giveaway, whatever, the introductory decks that they give out to new players and whatnot come with a Shivan Dragon that's literally worthless. So you can see that a lot of the things that are in those sets, they're worth something, not just because they're on the reserve list, it's because that specific card is so hard to get. Those cards aren't going to get any easier to get. It's just going to make, if they do, reprint them. It's just going to make getting copies of those cards that people who want to play the game easier to do so. But that's going to be my only little rant about that whole thing here on this. But anyway, I just wanted to quickly say about the dual lands that are in this set. There are dual lands in this set. I don't think that they're very good. I think that if you're maybe in 2 colors, maybe they're okay, but I'm not going to spend any time on them, really, because I don't think that they're that good, and I just don't think that they'll see much play at all. Right, next we're getting into our multicolored spells. First out, one of the mythics, Blot Out the Sky, X, white and a black. Sorcery trait, X tapped, 2/1 white and black spirit, inkling creature tokens with flying. If X is 6 or more, destroy all non-creature, non-land permanents. So it does a, very good board wipe effect if you get to 6 or more. And, maybe that's where you want it. You want another wrath effect that makes you tokens. So I don't know, but, just creating a whole bunch of stuff for yourself and then getting rid of all your opponent's stuff, that seems good as well. Maybe you want to do this for as much as possible so that then you can get as many inklings as you can, but they are tapped and it is sorcery. So again, you can't really take much advantage of them, even though they don't have haste or anything like that. But again, if you were to have Swiftfoot Boots, Lightning Greaves, whatever, things like that, or you had, I don't know, something that gave your team haste, well, that does nothing because they come in tapped. So I do want to skirt around that, but again, it kind of feels a bit and it's sort of hard to be like, well, am I going to tap out my whole turn to do this? I think at that point you are just like, well, can I do it for 6 or more so that I can just get that piece off and then be like, okay, I'm fine with that. Now I'm going to play some other stuff and actually advance myself so that I can get ahead and I can be the one to sort of close out this game. And it does destroy all non-land permanents, which is good. All non-creature, non-land permanents. So, and I don't know, creatures are going to be the biggest thing that you're going to find on most commander tables for the most part. So, not destroying creatures, I don't know. It kind of whiffs all around a lot of stuff, but it does destroy everything else, so there is that. It's just hard to evaluate where you'd be at with this when you do it. So I think you really need to care about these inklings in one way or another, be able to have some synergy with them or whatnot, or you just like flyers, I don't know. But it's interesting to think about where it could fit. Next up, Body of Research. Triple green, triple blue. Create an 0/0 blue fractal creature token. You put X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the number of cards in your library. So, do you want a 40/40 for 6? Do you want an 80/80 for 6? That's the question, like, do you want a massive creature for 6? This is literally going to be the biggest thing that's in Magic, period. There's not going to be anything that's going to be bigger than this ever, but again, it doesn't have evasion. There are ways to give it evasion. I was talking about the boots just a moment ago, and you might want to put it on this token, especially, if you can put it down with haste and things like that. That would be really good. But again, it does just take out one player for the most part. If you could put maybe the Myriad Sword on it, then maybe it might get there. But it is kind of like, well, that's a threat, we better kill it. Or we better just kill you, sort of thing. So it does paint a big target on you where either the creature goes or you go, sort of thing. But it can be just really funny, and you can do some other shenanigans with it if you have fling effects and things like that. You can sort of take out 2 players at once, things like that. That would be kind of, an interesting way to get around it being, well, okay, now what do I do? But, quite an interesting one. Next, one of the only planeswalkers that's a planeswalker on both sides as well, somehow. Rowan and Will. So, Rowan, instant and sorcery, 3 mana, 2 in a red. Instant sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. She comes in with 2 loyalty, ticks up, deals 1 damage to each opponent. If you've drawn 3 or more cards this turn, it deals 3 damage to each opponent instead. Okay, there's not a lot that we can do specifically in red. There are some things, but blue has a lot more. And since this commander, well, if this is in our commander deck, this can't be our commander. But again, if we have this in our deck, we can find that this will be at least in the Izzet deck. So, certainly we will have a lot of those blue draw effects. So, I don't know whether you're playing Will and Rowan Tribal for this, but maybe. But this seems okay. It's not terrible. Actually, it's pretty good with Torbran as well, because, just +2 to that one. Well, you're doing the 3 already, so that's pretty good. Then, once you're doing 3, it's 5. And that's real good. I know it's sort of like that whole argument, well, planeswalkers are the worst type and whatnot, all that sort of stuff. And there's not that many Super Friends decks in these colours. Most of them are in Atraxa colours. So it's kind of hard to say that this goes in a planeswalker deck, but I just think maybe this is sort of a, a Spellslinger deck. Neg 4. You get an emblem. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may pay 2. If you do copy that spell, you may choose new targets for the copy. Again, more spell slinging stuff. Paying 2 to copy a spell isn't the worst thing. I'm glad that it's consistent and it keeps happening. So that's pretty good too. Because the one thing about a lot of forks that you have in Magic are that they're not repeatable. Like the ones that are repeatable, that have buyback and whatnot, are fairly expensive. Just paying 2 every time you cast an instant or sorcery and you get to copy it. That's pretty good. It does reduce your instant sorceries by 1 on this side. It does also on the other side. But that seems okay. It seems pretty good in a Spellslinger deck. Alright, Will. Ticks up. Up to 1 target creature has base power and toughness 0-2 until end of turn. So, until your next turn. Sorry. So, and he's a 5 mana, 4 to blue, 4 loyalty planeswalker. Sorry. So making somebody's main threat. Now, main threat's a thing into a 0-2. Yeah, sure, that's pretty good. And it is up to 1. So if there's no targets, you can just target nothing, though there's probably going to be something. But again, this whole thing where planeswalkers are the worst type. But again, still pretty good. It does protect itself to a degree. Rowan doesn't do that such a good job, but it isn't far to her quote-unquote ult. And her ult's not terrible. Negs 3 to draw 2 cards. Again, this works well with Rowan, the other side. So if you could clone this Planeswalker, and there's like only one way to really do that, but again, if you can clone it, then it becomes pretty good because it sort of synergizes with itself to a degree. You do have to tick up every other turn and whatnot, but still, there's that. But drawing 2 cards at this level for 5 mana, I don't think you want to do that. You want to do that if you have other synergies, like I said, if you have the other side of this Planeswalker, or if you have other things that say when you draw a card or when you draw your second card or whatever, you know, those things, you still can get value off the -3, and if it's about to die, you might as well just draw 2 cards. And, you know, again, it can't be your commander, but again, maybe you've got some recursion, so you might be able to get back. Not too sure. -7. Exile up to 5 target permanents. For each permanent exiled this way, its controller creates a 4/4 red and blue and red elemental creature token. So, mass exile effect that, you know, gives your opponents, for the most part, I'm assuming, 4/4 elemental creature tokens. Maybe you just want this to exile a couple things. You don't really care about giving your opponent stuff, but then again, you could use this in a more proactive way. You could use this in the way to exile some of your own stuff. You can exile perhaps a bad token. Let's say you have a few 1/1s lying around that haven't really been doing much. You exile those tokens, and you get a whole bunch of 4/4s. That's pretty good. You know, they're good on defense. They're good on offense. I think that, you know, the options here, it gives you enough to sort of sink your teeth into and see if you can do something with this. I think, again, the instant and sorcery reduction on the front side of on Rowan is the better half, essentially, because it's 3 mana. You don't really care about 1 mana reduction on a 5 mana card. If it was a bigger reduction, then I think it would be worth it, but I don't think it's worth it at that level. You want to care about the other parts that Will does. So, you know, maybe if you're in a Spellslinger deck and this can work well in your deck, or if you're in Will and Rowan Tribal, maybe, or something else like that. You know, if you're in a real flavor deck, maybe you can find some space for this. Harness Infinity is up next. Oh my god. This card, 1 triple black, triple green. Exchange your hand and graveyard. Exile this card. So we've seen a few mass reanimate effects in the past. This is an instant that gets your graveyard into your hand and your hand into your graveyard. So I'm not sure exactly how you can take advantage of this, but there are a couple of things that do some stuff for you, like Sir Conrad and the new card Tormod the Desecrator. You know, those can do some stuff. So, and certainly green and black do really care about putting stuff into their graveyard. So maybe this can find some space. You know, just being able to get a bunch of your cards back to your hand. I'm not sure how good this is because, again, this is a lot of mana. And what are you going to be able to do after you cast this? Maybe not very much. So, I don't know. It's sort of hard to figure out what you're going to do with it because it's kind of like, well, I put all these cards back into my hand unless I have Reliquary Tower or something specific like that. Then I'm going to just discard half of them or almost all of them anyway. So, did that achieve that much? I don't know. But I certainly think that there could be things that could be done with this. So, it's just a matter of, like, working out with Sir Conrad sort of things, if that, you know, translates to enough stuff either leaving your graveyard plus entering your graveyard that it actually basically just kills all your opponents. That it means it's just game over. That could really work really well with that sort of an effect. So if that actually could be a thing, then, you know, if you have enough things, it could just be a win condition for you. There are other effects that sort of do similar effects and eventually it sort of doesn't matter. Or even again, even if you say, oh, well, I'm just going to discard half of my hand, again, Sword Conrad's going to trigger again. So therefore, you might just get it out of that if you don't actually win off of this. So there could still be ways that you can utilize the fact that you happen to have to discard the cards if you don't get Reliquary Tower or whatever. So I'd keep it in mind. Next up, Casmina. Enigma Sage. 1 and a blue and a green for a 2-mana Planeswalker. Oh boy, here we go with the 3-mana Simic Planeswalkers again. Each other Planeswalker you control has a lot of the abilities of Casmina Enigma Sage. That doesn't sound too broken. Of course not. No, nothing could go wrong with this, could it? Ticks up by 2 to scry 1. Doesn't seem too bad. Neg X. Create a 0/0 blue fractal creature token. Put X +1/+1 counters on it. Okay, not too bad. Think that's just fine. Can protect itself with this, but it is a tick down. Neg 8. Search your library for an instant and sorcery card that shares a colour with this Planeswalker. Exile that card, then shuffle your library. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost. So, you can play a blue or a green spell without paying its mana cost. There's only so many cards that you would want to cast, like like Cyclonic Rift you wouldn't want to cast with this because I don't believe that you can pay for its alternate cost. So, there are only a few spells that are sort of out there that would get you into a position that actually means anything decent. However, one of them is Enter the Infinite. And we all know that that's just a classic win card. There's also Tooth and Nail, which basically is just another spell that just wins the game for the most part on the spot. So any spell that, I don't know whether you can actually entwine it though again, but anyway, those effects, even like half of that is still really good. And it's just one of those things. There are multiple other spells. You can tutor up the Salte Ultimatum with this, which basically tutors 3 or 4 cards, whatever it is. No, 3 cards, and an opponent chooses one of them, and then that goes back, and then you cast the other 2 cards for free. So you can just get that off of this, cast that for free, then cast 2 more spells for free. Basically, that will say you win the game. There are so many ways that this can just go crazy, absolutely crazy. And I expect that some people are going to try to figure out what they can do with this very quickly. It doesn't matter that it cares about Planeswalkers that much. Maybe it goes in a Planeswalkers deck. I can see that there are some things that you could do with it, especially since it has certain tick-ups and certain other Planeswalkers really want a tick-up for 2 or whatnot so that they can get to their ult really quickly, things like that. Or just, do things that really effectively make them unkillable very quickly. Just gaining 2 loyalty is really good. I certainly think it can see some play. Pestilent Cauldron and Rejuvenative Burst up next. So, the Cauldron, artifact for 3 mana, 2 and a black, taps to make to discard a card, and you create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token. When it dies, you gain a life. Pay 1 and tap it. Each opponent mills cards equal to the amount of life you gain this turn. So, you kill off the pest somehow, you kill off a few other things that happen to gain you life, because black really cares about sacrifice stuff, or you can have lifelink, that sort of thing. There are some things in green that sort of give you life and things like that. So, maybe mill some amount of cards for your opponent. I wouldn't use this as, oh, I'm going to mill my opponents out if I gain 50 or more life or whatever. I would use this as, oh, I'm going to mill them, then I'm going to steal stuff from their graveyard style effect. 4 and tap, exile 4 target cards from a single graveyard, draw a card. You know, that value isn't too bad. You're exiling cards from people's graveyard and you're getting something for free. I think it's a little bit much just to draw a card. You know, that's the main thing. I think that you benefit from this. But again, you're kind of benefiting from exiling 4 cards from a player's graveyard. But it is one player at a time. But maybe it just sort of hoses one graveyard deck or another. And there are a lot of graveyard decks out there, but it is a lot of mana to get there. But, you know, eventually when you have this going, it's really quite good. Not sure. Restorative Burst, though. 5 mana sorcery, 3 in double green. Return up to 2 target creature, land, and or planeswalker cards from your graveyard to your hand. Exile. Each player gains 4 life and then you exile Restorative Burst. Look, the 4 life, for the most part, not going to matter. Who cares? It's just a nice little thing. You gain that 4 life plus your opponents gain that 4 life. So you're not down on life or whatever. But you get to return up to 2 either creature, land, and planeswalker cards from your graveyard to your hand. That's pretty good. You know, Eternal Witness is played, Balagan Recovery's played. This, on the back of this other card that seems okay, or at least decent, or at least can sort of do some amount of stuff. You know, I certainly think that this can see some play, because it has enough flexibility and can do enough powerful things that would warrant it being played. Alright, so we'll continue on. Next, another flip card. This one, Torrent Sculptor, plus Flamethrower Sonata. So, Totem Sculptor, 2 and double blue, 2/2. It has ward 2, so your opponents have to pay 2 to cast spells that target it. When it enters the battlefield, exile an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. You put a number of +1/+1 counters on Torrent Sculptor equal to that, half that card's CMC or mana value rounded up. So, you don't get the card back with this. You know, in gaining some power with this, you want to be exiling something big. There are some Izzet spells that they've just reprinted in this set, or just printed in this set rather, that are quite big that you can cycle into the graveyard for pretty cheap, and they make a treasure and whatnot. Things like this, they're okay. It kind of works well with Flamethrower Sonata. 1 and a red, sorcery, discard a card, then draw a card. When you discard an instant or sorcery card this way, it deals damage equal to that card's CMC or mana value to target creature or planeswalker you don't control. The problem here is it's only to creature or planeswalker. You can't bolt people or whatever. You can't shock people or whatever. You can't lightning strike people. So, getting rid of a planeswalker sometimes is relevant. Again, it's not much text. It is a little bit of text, and this is on a 2 mana spell, but it is a sorcery. But again, it can deal a lot of damage. It can deal, you know, whatever damage you want to that creature or that planeswalker. Up to you what you discard. It does depend on what's in your hand though. But if you have a few high cost spells, you know, you can certainly discard some of those if you're not casting them anytime soon. And I think this is more built a little bit for those spell slingery style decks again. I still think that this could see some play somewhere if you really care about like flashback or if you really care about doing other things with your spells, you know, if you can do something with the Torrent Sculptor and things like that, if you can flicker it or whatnot, keep getting counters on it, or moving counters off of it to put it on other creatures, or go Semi-Voltron. Like, again, this isn't a legendary and can't be your commander or anything, but it can get in there maybe sometimes. It doesn't really have evasion, but again, there are ways to give it. So it might see some play in some decks. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's worth thinking for some decks. Alright, next, Selfless Glyph Weaver and Deadly Vanity. Selfless Glyph Weaver, 3 mana, 2 and a white, 2/3. You exile the Glyph Weaver, creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. So, Selfless Spirit Soul effect here, but you do have to exile the Glyph Weaver. That means you can't recur it or anything like that. Or it's hard, very hard to recur it. Deadly Vanity, 5 and triple black. Choose creature or planeswalker. Destroy all other creatures and planeswalker. Oh, choose a creature or planeswalker, then destroy all creatures and planeswalker. So, you get to keep your best creature or planeswalker. Usually I would suggest keeping your creature unless your planeswalker can actually reanimate a creature, whatnot. And I would do this again after combat for the most part, so that you can get in some amount of damage or whatnot, things like this, or you can make people make bad blocks and things like this sometimes or whatnot. Haste or the ability to attack right away is also quite good. Things like that, you want to utilize what you have when you have it. But when you need a board wipe, this might just be alright. There are a lot of other options, but the fact that this sort of comes attached to something that will protect your board and something that will get rid of the board, maybe it can see some play in certain decks, I'm not sure, but again, just the versatility of it here is just sort of like the reason that I've sort of thought about putting it on this list and want to draw some people's attention to it, because it is quite decent to be able to protect your board. That's a 1 to 2, maybe 3 mana effect. Or even a 4 mana effect, depending. But on a creature, it's certainly a 2 to 3 mana effect. So that's fairly on rate. Destroying everything except for your one best thing. That's pretty good, for 6 or 7 mana for the most part with black. Again, it's not the greatest, but it's still fairly good. So it does have some benefits where you can find other synergies and whatnot. Again, if, like I said, if you're planeswalker, if your creature can reanimate other things and whatnot, might be worth it. Flame Skull Celebrant and Reveal in Silence. So Flame Scroll Celebrant, 1 and a red, 2/1. Whenever an opponent activates an ability that isn't a mana ability, it deals 1 damage to that player. This, I think, and it pump it for 1 and a red, it gets +2/+0 until end of turn. This, I think, mainly you might see this in burn style, Boros decks. It'll certainly see a bit of play up against, sort of Torbrins and things like that, double damage effects and whatnot, mass burn effects. Again, this is a Boros card as well, so don't forget that. Some people I know, they go, oh, well, I'm not playing it for the other side. Doesn't matter, it's a, this is part of its color identity. So, Reveal in Silence, double white, instant. Your opponents can't cast spells or activate Planeswalker's loyalty abilities this turn. You exile Revel in Silence. So it's another silence style effect. It does come to this, celebrant dude that, pings people. I think, again, the versatility of it, pretty good. If you need the burn creature, sometimes it can be relevant. Now, the other side's a bit more of a spiky card to a degree, but I think the usefulness of both sides sometimes can come in a pinch. If somebody is really playing a more high power deck and you're just sort of playing a more lower power deck or a more fair deck or whatnot, then, the silence can be good if you sort of see somebody's about to sort of storm off and go off, or, or if they seem like they're about to go off or whatnot, you can sort of stop them so that, you can just live for that next turn and, sort of try to take that player out as much as possible, or you've sort of made them use as much of their gas as possible. That way they're sort of out of gas, and then you just sort of, you can take them out at any time. The Celebrant does sort of keep in check all abilities. So, except for mana abilities. But again, that's pretty good. 1 damage isn't a lot, but when it's paired up with other things, I think it can be quite good. So, keep this in mind for certain decks. Again, the versatility is pretty good here for certain things. Augmenter Pugilist and Echoing Evacuation. So the Augmenter Pugilist, 1 and double green, 3/3, it's trample. Trample Troll. As long as you control 8 or more lands, it gets +5/+5. So it can be an 8/8. Not a terrible threat. Not the greatest threat in the world, but not the worst. Echoing Evacuation, 3 and double white. Choose target creature you control. Each other creature you control becomes a copy of it until end of turn, except those copies aren't legendary if the chosen creature is legendary. I think the clone spell, again, is the most, notable side of this. I don't think the other side is as notable, but sometimes, just late game, and you just need, 8 more power or something, and it does have trample, so that might be alright. You have Swiftfoot Boots again, you can get in right away, or other effects of Giving Haste, you can get in right away. Do something when you cast it, so it has an effect on the game. Cloning things, or making all your creatures a clone of one other creature, could be very useful. You can do a lot of shenanigans with it. You can make the Biomancer effect work, where if you have 4 or more of the Biomancer on your battlefield, you win the game. So that might work. Again, you've got to get back to your upkeep or whatever and whatnot. There are other things you can do with it, like ETBs and things like that, and you won't lose those creatures because they don't obey the legendary rule and whatnot. So that can be really good. And even if you have a few tokens, like you have a bunch of 1/1s, you say, okay, I have this 5/5 or whatever that I have over here. I'm going to make all my 1/1s into this 5/5. Suddenly, you basically made almost all your creatures get +4/+4. Or you can just do other things with it if you have, like, spell slingery stuff. If you go, okay, well, what I have is a whole bunch of, random goblins. But I have Goblin Sharpshooter or whatever it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of everything. I have a copy of Goblin Sharpshooter. So then I'm going to cast a instant or sorcery. And if you have a few Goblin Sharpshooters, it's just like, okay, now all my Goblin Sharpshooters deal a whole lot of damage to my opponents, things like that. So there's certainly really big things that you can do with this. Double Major, it's a little bit less of an effect, but I still think it's quite a good effect. 2 mana instant, Simic, blue and a green. Copy target creature spell you control. It is, except it isn't legendary if the spell is legendary. The copy you create, it becomes a token. So you can only do this while it's on the stack and whatnot, but I think it's worth it. I think it's certainly worth it. You can get double ETBs. You can get double effects off of a legendary creature, whether that's your commander or not. It mostly will be your commander for the most part, I think, because most people, again, build around their commander, whatnot, that sort of thing. So it can be really useful to get another copy of your commander, do some more stuff with it. And again, you get around the legendary rules, so I certainly think that this can see some play. And it is only just 2 mana, which is just absurdly good. I want to talk quickly about the commands, at least the ones that are instant speed ones. I don't think I'm going to go into too much depth into these cards. If you're in these colours and you consider what the spell actually does is alright value in your deck, I think that they're worth running, or at least worth considering. I think that you just run them as value cards. There's not really much synergy with them. They're just good value cards for the most part. Alright, next, Radiant Scroll Wielder, or Wielder? 2 and Boros, so red and a white. Instant sorceries you control have life. Oh, and it's also a 2/4 draw. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile an instant or sorcery card at random from your graveyard. You may cast it this turn. If the spell was cast this way, you put it instead of putting it in your graveyard, you exile it instead. So, getting that free spell at random, again at random, not the best, but it is 4 mana, and that's alright. And again, it's in Boros, so they're giving Boros something else. And giving your spells lifelink is quite good. We've seen a couple of creatures and whatnot that kind of give your spells lifelink. So this is just another one. Of course you want to do this with some of the mass damage style effects and whatnot, so that you can do a whole bunch of damage to things. Gain some life off of doing a bunch of damage to things. And again, just giving you that added card advantage sort of effect every turn. If you only have 1 instant or sorcery in your graveyard, then it's not really that random or whatever, so it's kind of good if you only have 1 in there. So it's almost like a tutor or just flashback for the most part, but again, you get to cast it, without paying its mana cost, so that's pretty good. And again, you can just get extra value out of it, so I think it can see play in certain decks, and I think it's just a good value card. Alright, next, Restorative Burst. Golgari colors, instant. So a black and a green. You choose a creature. When that creature dies this turn, search your library for a creature card with lesser CMC or mana value, put it onto the battlefield tab, then shuffle your library. Okay, first of all, this doesn't have to be your creature. You can choose an opponent's creature. If you don't have any creatures on the battlefield, or if one of your creatures, or if your creatures perhaps are the smallest creatures or whatever, you can get in those situations where you're just behind on board, behind in every way, whatever. You cast this, targeting the biggest thing that you can target, even if you have a big board or whatever. You can just get something of value from your deck straight onto the battlefield after the board wipe has happened. Therefore, you're in a better position than what you would have been, without this sort of thing. You get something out of it. You can't counter the board wipe, you can't protect your board, whatever. At least you're going to get something out of it. And again, Golgari colors are about reanimation and whatnot and recursion. So, again, you might be able to recur those cards as well, things like that. So I certainly think it's worth it. If you're in a sacrifice deck, I think it's even better, because you can sack something big, and then or whatnot, or you can make somebody sacrifice their big thing, and therefore you can get something of value from your deck, from the other synergies that are sort of happening within your own deck. Again, you get this thing, and it doesn't matter. So, just getting something extra for, 2 mana from your deck, even if it's cost a less, I still think it can be worth it. Plus, it's just sort of a tutor for one of your better spells that is less. So, if I sacrificed something that is CMC 4, I might want to get my Eternal Witness. Then 4, I can get my Eternal Witness and get back the Rushed Rebirth, or I can get back something else from my graveyard to my hand. I can do this all over again if I get the Rushed Rebirth, things like that. So there's all sorts of things that you can do with this, I think, and it certainly will see a bit of play. Next up, this one, I'm not 100% sure if this will see as much play. It's a little bit hard to tell. Vanishing Burst, the Orzhov spell, white and a black, 2 mana instant. You exile a monocolored permanent. So it can't hit lands. Okay. It can't hit artifacts because they're not colored for the most part. It can hit the Great Henge and a few others, but except for the ones that don't have that actually have a color, you know, it can't hit Devoid cards because it's technically not a color again. So those cards, there's a few other cards that it can't hit, but outside of that, it can hit a lot of stuff. But again, it is only monocolored stuff, so it can't hit 2 or more colored stuff. So it's sort of hard to say where this will find space, but I certainly think it can be worth it because exiling a, doubling season or whatnot is pretty good, and this can do that. It can get rid of a lot of really good threats that are on the battlefield. There are a lot of things that are monocolored, so I think it can be worth it, but it's just really hard to tell. I think it needs to see a bit of play out there in the wilds to see how good it can be or how bad it can be before we make too much of a decision about it. I still think we should consider seeing how good it is. Alright. Next, Venerable Warslinger, 3 mana, 3/3. So, 1 and a red and a white Boros creature spirit cleric. Vigilance and Trample. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may return target creature card with CMC or mana value X or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, where X is the amount of damage it dealt to that player. So it's sort of a mini Sun Titan effect. It does have Trample and it does have Vigilance. So those are alright things. You do like recursion is good. And, sometimes this can come down fairly quickly. Of course, it can come down late, but still, sometimes it can come down very quickly off of a board wipe in the later game as well. So you can maybe get in there for 3, get something that's CMC 3 or less back to the battlefield. That's just really good value. So I think this can see some play. It's not quite as good as Sun Titan is, obviously, but I still think that this might just see play, maybe just in Boros decks, but certainly is worth thinking about in other decks as well. If you have these colors and your colors don't include colors that traditionally have a lot of recursion. Alright. Next, Fracture. Another Orzhov spell, instant, white and black. Destroy target artifact, enchantment, or planeswalker. Look, again, as I said, planeswalker isn't much text, but it's a little bit of text. And just disenchant is 2 mana, so that's okay too. So, again, just sometimes the planeswalker will be relevant, but just another disenchant effect, and it is a multicolour spell, so it's sometimes a little bit more difficult to cast if you don't have your colours, those sorts of things. But, that little bit of upside, that tiny bit of upside that's there, sometimes that will be relevant, sometimes, very rarely, I know, but still, you go up against a Planeswalker deck and suddenly you go, well, shit, I wish I had Fracture. Instead of this Disenchant. So it is a little bit of an upgrade, so if you would be playing a Disenchant, maybe you should just play this instead. Again, I don't want to go through too many of the uncommons. There are some that I do want to go through. Practical Research, 5 mana, instant, blue and red, Draw 4 cards, discard 2 cards unless you discard an instant or sorcery. Good in Spellslinger decks for the most part. So I think if you're Izzet Spellslingers, you might want it. It's another one of those cards that's basically thirst for knowledge, thirst for meaning sort of cards, you know. So I think it can be really good to have this. It is a little bit of mana, but again, I think it can be worth it. Quadratus Apprentice, a 2 mana 2/2. Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, you look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may reveal a land card from among them. Put that card into your hand, the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So it only gets lands to your hand, but that's still pretty good. It helps you hit your lands every single turn, or as long as you can cast instant sorceries. I think it has enough good value for certain decks that it can be playable. Certainly at least in Simic plus colours. Reconstruct History, I think this one's really good. 2 and Boros colours, so red and a white. Sorcery, return up to 1 target artifact, up to 1 target enchantment, up to 1 target instant, and up to 1 target sorcery, and up to 1 target planeswalker card from your graveyard to hand, and then you exile this card. Very good. I think this can see play in a lot of decks, actually. In decks that do struggle, Boros style decks, you might think about running this in certain other decks just to get recursion. If you don't have traditional colors that have too much recursion and whatnot, and you want to get back some of your spells, even just if you are in colors that have some amount of recursion but not a lot, I still think it can be quite good. Alright, next, Witherbloom Apprentice, 2 mana Golgari, green and a black 2/2, Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, each opponent loses 1 life. It's sort of very much like Liliana. It can go infinite with a couple of things. So I think it's quite strong. Some people might want to play it if you're in a deck that is in these colors and cares about sort of instant and sorceries. You can just get some good value off of it, plus you can just sort of kill people with it. Last one I want to mention is Eureka Moment. I think this one's quite good, and I think it's a little bit overlooked. 4 mana, instant, draw 2 cards, and you can put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. The fact that this is instant just makes it absolutely great, and I think, you know, if you're in a Spellslinger deck, and you want to be ramping yourself, you want to be putting this card into your decks, it's pretty good. But that's pretty much it for the whole list for the set. And oh my god, there is quite a bit, and we have gone for over an hour here now. But guys, you know, that is it, as I said. But do tell me what you think. What cards are you hyped to build around? As I said, I've not gone through every single card in the set, but, you know, certainly gone through most of them. I've tried to limit it to being mostly the ones that are Commander, will find some place, or have a large possible place in Commander. So, you know, again, let me know what you guys think. I think this set is pretty cool. But again, yeah, let me know what you think of the set overall. Write it down there in the comments below. Please remember that the success of channels like this is based on viewers like you, so please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing if you would like to support this content. You can also get social with us on our Discord and on our Facebook. If you would like to further support the channel, you can go onto our Patreon. All links are in the description. Thank you for your support. It really means a lot. I hope you have enjoyed this video here today. And if you have, I hope you will come back for another one. See you then.